on DPVA's website. Yeah, there it is now. Which I encourage certainly people to be on camera. It's easier to have a conversation that way, but also just want to make sure people know. And with that, I will go ahead and call us to order. I want to thank Randy and in particular, who is helping just kind of facilitate this, as well as Nick from a technology standpoint from the DPVA staff. I want to thank Sham, who is here from his honeymoon in Puerto Rico, because obviously democracy doesn't stop and neither does politics. And of course, I want to thank each of you all for making time as a volunteer and a party leader to be here for this important discussion. Tonight, we have the important task of discussing the method of nominating a candidate to succeed our incredible Congressman Donald McEachin. And I wanted to start by recapping a bit of what we discussed yesterday during our informational call, and then giving some updates on what's happened today with the governor's writ of election. And then from there, we will move forward with some discussion about our options available to us given this timeline, as well as hopefully start making some decisions. Not hopefully, we will need to make decisions tonight given our timeline. So again, to back us up to yesterday, yesterday I just went over with many of you all, but I know some weren't able to join, generally what the process is in the instance of a vacancy. So first of all, our congressman's office is still hard at work. The official business of government still continues. And so if any constituent has a concern or an issue or that they need to raise with the congressman's office, they can still do that through the usual manner through his federal office and district offices. In addition, I wanted to make sure that people know that even though this is a party-run process, we did have to wait for the governor to call the special election. So the governor today set the special election for February 21st, 2023, which is a Tuesday. And it is our responsibility to nominate a candidate by December 23rd, that is next Friday. And that timeline is early and not something that we can lobby against or change or put a press release out and hope for better. That is set in stone. And so because of that timeline, we actually do not have the option to depend on our usual systems of government to administer this election. So we are not able to say, call up our local registrar's offices and say, great, we have to run a primary, y'all do that, right? Can we do that next Tuesday? It is actually going to be incumbent on the Democratic Party committee, that is the 4th Congressional District Committee, to administer this nomination contest. Many of you have been involved in some level of nomination contest before. We do have special elections often in this great Commonwealth. So even if it wasn't one that you were voting in, maybe it's something that you helped out in a local committee, or maybe you volunteered for a candidate of your choice in a nomination contest. There are multiple options available to us as far as a nomination contest. There is I would say, most lowercase d democratic process, that is, it's open to as many people as who want to participate. That is called a firehouse primary or an unassembled caucus. An unassembled caucus, or also known as a firehouse primary, is when you set a day and certain days, certain locations, and anyone who says that they are a Democrat and signs a statement to that effect that they are a Democrat would be able to vote and leave and move about their day. That is one option. We also have the option of an assembled caucus, which is that at a certain time, at one certain place, everyone would come together and everyone would have to be there until voting was done. That is obviously a lot more time sensitive and creates the barrier of everyone having to come into one place. But it does reduce the logistical burden of having staffing operations in multiple parts of the district. And it does reduce the number of, volunteers and I guess venues needed to be able to execute the election. And then finally, there's a different method that's very uncommon that Democrats don't typically use, but it's called the convention process. We use it in a lot of our internal party business, but we don't use it usually to nominate legislative or congressional candidates. That would be a way that we would basically weight voting strength by the size of the district, the voting share of the population within the district, and say Richmond has X number of votes, Petersburg has this many votes. We go through with each locality. Each locality would be responsible for then getting delegates or representatives to then vote in the convention on their behalf. It would be the smallest amount of people, certainly, that would vote to nominate our candidate. But that is also, again, an option that reduces the, number of venues necessary, but does, I think, still require a lot of logistical support just because of the nature of each committee would then have to nominate people. There would be a lot, I guess, still in motion necessary to execute a convention. Yesterday, it did seem when I gave some of these options that most of the committee and Democratic chairs and other activists that were present did prefer a firehouse primary. I will share that, of course, that is my preference as well, an option that is easiest for voters, but also allows people outside of the normal Democratic committee structure to participate, because we know that as Democrats, we want our nominee to be the successor, and in a district like BA4, a lot of people, whether or not they are Democratic Party activists, are going to be represented by our nominee. And so we want to make sure that as many people have access to this information and the ability to vote as possible. Given the timeline, we are looking at a very short window. We're needing to tell the state by next Friday that we have a nominee, which means that we need to have the nominee before next Friday. So basically by this time, really by like Wednesday or Thursday next week, we need to have everything buttoned up and vote certified within our own nomination contest. That doesn't give us a lot of options for days that people could vote, especially because we would need time to give candidates to file to even be a part of our nomination contest. So with all that said, I want to make a recommendation. I want to open it up for some discussion within Central Committee members. I know that we do have some guests on here as well. So while I know who are members and guests, I would just ask that guests reserve their comments and allow voting members of the committee to be those that speak, and I'll call on voting members to speak as I see your hands. But my recommendation, and I certainly would open up for discussion after this, is that we look to do a firehouse primary, and that we choose a day that we can focus our efforts on running a firehouse primary really well. That would include making sure that we have venues that are open and accessible for our community to participate. That means accessible as far as voting, access, like physically accessible, people can drive up if they need that, accessible as far as parking, if that's a need, a place that people know and recognize and maybe have voted at before because it's a common place in their community. Also accessible in terms of timing, right? Only having 3 hours to vote is not accessible, would cause long lines and make it difficult for people to vote, and we don't want that either. Accessible in terms of across the district. If we only had one location or even two locations, we know, and I know many of you all on this call like to remind me, we have 14 localities. This is a big district, and we need to make sure that we have access for as many voters as possible, so people aren't driving hours and hours to vote in this election. That is of most importance to me. And given some of the research that the party staff and I and some of you all have done today, we know that we do have some venues that could be available over the coming days. We want to make sure that candidates also have a fair process in participating in this, so that they have time to file and then also communicate to voters about their candidacy. Y'all, it's Monday night. We're going to make a decision tonight, but even if filing opens tomorrow and filing closes, later this week, it would be very difficult for us to responsibly stand up an election and communicate to voters by this weekend that they should vote this weekend. As much as I have voted for and supported a Sunday voting bill, I'm hesitant to say that within 24 hours from candidate filing ending, that people would be able to responsibly vote in this election. So I know that was long-winded, but, and I see Roland's hand. In general, my recommendation is going to be that we move forward with the firehouse primary on a day next week, and make it as similar to a normal voting day as possible. So like Tuesday, 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., multiple locations across the district. We really focus on staffing and running those well. And we make sure that we have a working committee of folks who can help spearhead that process. Roland, I'm looking to you next.
We have to decide about candidates filing. What's the difference in that and registered, quote unquote, that shows some people already are registered on VPAP? And do we know what Republicans are likely to do? And might their event cause any confusion on where people would be going to vote? And I'll throw it out now, even though Saturday is short and a problem, I think it's probably better than a weekday.
Thank you, Roland. So yes, let me speak a bit to that. So candidates, all candidates have to go through a few different steps to make it to officially the ballot. I'm including setting up a statement of organization with the federal or state government, depending on what level of office you're running for. And some folks have even just set up a bank account and a federal committee in order to start receiving donations. But that does not necessarily mean that they will ultimately continue in this process as a Democratic primary candidate. They could decide that they want to run as an independent. They could decide that they do want to seek the Democratic Party nomination. So our process is to set up what is the requirement for becoming the Democratic nominee for the 4th CD. We will set the criteria in terms of whether we have a filing fee and how much, what, if any, signatures are required, and that sort of thing. I know we discussed this a bit yesterday, that the committee might be interested in making this a similar experience to a candidate's normal filing to be a Democratic nominee. As far as what Republicans are doing, I've had 24 hours to figure out what we're going to do. So I can't say that I've been watching them. Sham, I don't know if you know, but I would say our best interest is to focus on what we're going to do and make sure that we run it really well.
Alexis, this is Eric. I can't raise my hand. I'm just on my phone. But you mentioned is Tuesday as a potential date, and my preference would be to give our candidates more time to communicate with voters and our committee more time. And so doing it, as late as we can comfortably. Tuesday is typically election day, but if we could do this Wednesday or Thursday, that would be 1 or 2 more days. And I think that might not be a bad thing, unless there's a compelling reason to do it on a Tuesday.
Thank you, Eric. We do have some hands up in front of you. I'll respond briefly and then go to Don and Murray. We should definitely discuss which day. I recommended Tuesday for a couple reasons. One, that's a normal day that people are used to going to vote, and making it as open as possible as far as like 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Again, models after what a typical Tuesday election would look like. I also know that at the end of Tuesday, we're going to have to count those votes. We could have potentially provisional ballots that we would need to go back to the registrar's office the next day and make sure that that person was eligible to vote. There, God forbid, because we'll run a good process, but there could be, and candidates should have the right to make sure that everything has been done correctly. And so I just don't want to get us so close to that Friday deadline when it comes to the election day, so that we can make sure that we've gotten the counts and the due diligence to make sure that everything was done correctly. Don, I see your hand, and then I'm gonna go to Murdy.
Hey, sorry, Alexa, can I tell us one thing before that? I would just recommend, like, from a organizational and practical standpoint, instead of having for the candidate's perspective, because they're going to want a representative at each voting location, whatever date you choose, give enough time for ballots to be transported to DPVA's office. I think it makes sense from a whole caucus standpoint to have everyone bring their ballots to DPVA's office. You have a singular location that everyone is able to, if the campaigns want an observer, if the campaigns want a representative, they're able to show up to our office in Richmond and to observe the voting and the counting process. Sorry, the counting process. I think that would be worthwhile for the committee generally to agree upon. Also, happy to open our office for that entire process.
Yep. Thank you, Sean. Don.
Yeah, on this idea of when and where to have the election, I wanted to throw out the idea that I think we did this when we did our firehouse election in Richmond City Democratic Committee when we elected Colette as our representative for our nominee. We had a weekend. I think we had one weekend and we had one day. And I think the ability to have a weekend should be really considered because there are people that work. We need to have more. I think if we're going to have this to be open and as much participation as possible, I think we should really consider having 2 days and one of those days be a weekend. I'm not suggesting any days, but I would just throw out there for discussion, 1 day and one weekend. But on a point of order, I'd like to know, since we've opened up the meeting, do we have someone that is taking minutes as a secretary? And do we have a roll call, or has attendance been taken for the CD to form that we have a quorum?
Thank you, Don, for the point of order, and I'll address that first. I see our secretary coming off mute. Isaac, if you want to address it.
Yeah, Don, I have a head count of the participants that are here on the call. I can confirm we have a quorum of the 4 CD committee members. There were 29 in total. We need 35% to conduct business. So anything north of 9 meets the requirements. But in addition to that, I'll be grabbing minutes from the recording of this that's streamed on the DPVA website and be able to report back out on the back end. The key pieces will be ensuring, where we capture some of the discussion as well as the Robert's rules, the motions that are made tonight, and that will be reflected pretty quickly post-meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. And Don, regarding your weekend recommendation, that is exactly what we want to discuss tonight. I know I see Murdy's hand next, and I'll just share a little bit more. I don't want to hold the floor, but I want to share a little bit more about how I came to Tuesday, because I've spoken to a few people today. I also really wanted us to have Saturday as one of the options, if not the main option. We started doing research on locations, and I'm not going to say we called every place in every locality because we didn't, you know what I mean? But we called some of the main voting locations that we've had success working with in the past. And frankly, we also started looking at how many people we would need to have available for all of the locations on both days, and also considered how communication will work. As you might imagine, a lot of people are already, especially news organizations, are already trying to communicate how people could vote. And we're really concerned about making sure that this is as clear as possible. So if we were to do Saturday and Tuesday, I would really want, and I would look for y'all's support on having all of the same localities open for all of the same hours on both days, because what I wouldn't want to happen is Saturday you vote at this location, Tuesday or Wednesday you vote at this other location, hours are different. And so just getting that congruence was what ended up being the challenge when I started looking at, could we logistically pull off Saturday and Tuesday? That was one of the main challenges, as well as, like I said, staffing capacity, because we're really looking at needing 30 people per location in order to do this really well, to make sure that we don't have really long lines and that, people can move in and out really quickly. And Don, like you said, you were there for our nomination contest and at the main public library. It is quite an operation. And in this instance, we're looking at 14 localities and probably 5 to 7 times more people voting. So I'm not taking it off the table. I just want to share a little more rationale about why I landed on the recommendation of just the 1 day next week. Murdy, and then I see Silene.
Hey, Murdy Khan here, CD4 member from Chesterfield. Alexis, thank you so much for all of the hard work you've put into this, and to the Democratic Party of Virginia for helping advise in this process, as it is pretty chaotic. I believe what Governor Youngkin is doing is wrong for democracy, giving our party only 11 days to nominate a candidate, because a large part of the process is being able to give voters fair notice and being able to have as large of an operation as possible when trying to run a nominations process to be as fair to the voters all across the Congressional District 4. Congressional District 4 is really big, and I was just wondering, I heard yesterday and today, and I know this isn't a finalized thing or anything, but I've heard us say that, oh, well, maybe we only get 1 or 2 locations, or ideally, of course, I know we'd want a lot more locations than that. And I was wondering, what is the math we were doing to come to the conclusion of how many locations we think we're capable of staffing? I'm just kind of wondering where those numbers are kind of coming from, and is there any solid method that we can use to kind of determine what is the maximum amount of locations we can do safely without compromising the vote? I hope that question makes sense.
Absolutely. I love this question because it lets me pull out my little org chart notes that I have. So just for a little more background, Mr. Glazer referenced the nomination contest in 2019. Many of you may be familiar with Mike Herring, a Commonwealth's attorney from Richmond, who resigned, and it opened up a special election in August 2019 that Richmond City Democrats were responsible for running. I was in charge of that process at the time, and drew from experience from Cheryl Zando and the Henrico Democrats Committee nominating contests in that area, as well as Petersburg and the SD16's nomination contest and HD 74 nomination special election contest. We've had a lot over the last, I would say 5 to 7 years that I've either volunteered with or supported in some way, or kind of taken advice from other folks. And what I have seen is, in general, as far as what is a team necessary to run a good caucus, is one, you need kind of the election captain that's in charge of that voting location. They're the decision maker that day for everything that happens in their voting site. You need a team of people who are greeters, who are helping welcome people, make sure they know where the voting location is, help them start signing in on the caucus participation form, because we usually have somebody sign to say, yes, I'm a Democrat and I plan to support this Democrat, whoever wins, or at least not oppose them, right? Not vote for the Republican after participating in this process. Then we need somebody to actually check them in and make sure that they are a registered voter. And again, to make sure that lines move quickly, we need, I would say, depending on the location, 5 to 7 people at check-in, literally logged into the voter file and just checking that person's ID against the registered voter list, just like you would at a normal polling location. Then you have people move over right to their voting station where they're marking their ballot. At that station, you need a couple people who are responsible for making sure that the person who checked in receives a ballot, and that either a ticket is exchanged, or some way there's a method of making sure that the person who is checked in receives a ballot. That ballot station happens. We need somebody then that is observing the ballot box and making sure that only people who have voted are putting their ballots in the box. And we need usually a couple more people that are kind of keeping order, right? A sergeant at arms in case somebody has gotten too close to the polling location and is trying to influence votes outside or inside of the voting location. Usually need like a runner that's just able to like, hey, the volunteers haven't eaten dinner today or lunch, right? Like somebody go get pizza. And so when you add all that up, it does end up being about 30 people. We also need a team of folks who, at least 1 or 2, who can help with curbside voting if any voter needs access to getting their ballot out at the curb of the location. So it ends up being about 30 people again, especially if we're looking at 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. or a longer voting time window where you can't necessarily rely on the same people to work the whole day. We could be looking at needing even more volunteers. So that I hope answers your question a little bit. So that's where I get the number 30, just based on the number of people needed for each of those roles. We also, and Sham kind of mentioned this, we'll need a teller committee. Those will be people that actually count the ballots. If we are doing just one day and multiple locations, then we could explore an option like Sean mentioned, where all the ballot boxes come to one location at the Democratic Party, where campaign staff and the teller committee would open the ballot boxes and review that day. That would reduce the number of tellers we need, as opposed to necessarily opening the ballot box at 5 different locations and having campaign observers in 5 different locations, right? So I know that probably sounds exhaustive. That's because it is, y'all. It's going to be a lot of work. And it's why I really want us to be thinking carefully about what option we choose. I think it can sound sometimes easy to say, let's have as many voting options as possible. But you got to remember, the more options you create, the more options and requirements we have for making sure that Democrats and candidates have a good experience. So I want us to just be keeping that in mind. And frankly, we got 32 people on this call. If half of us sign up for something, we're well on our way for one of our polling locations. So please keep that in mind. I'm going to pass to Silene and then Nicole.
Yeah, I wanted to say, yeah, Alexis, you kind of basically hit some of the stuff that I was thinking, especially having gone through as a CD chair, a process. So as a former CD chair. So I'm in support of one day, anytime you have multiple days, and it's only because the short window we have. And so I think in terms of, possible error, you know what I'm saying? And then finding locations that can accommodate 2 different days. So I support multiple locations. I support Tuesday. That gives us more than enough time, except to make sure that everything is certified. And so, that's my thoughts on it. We want to have a fair process. So obviously I support Firehouse, but so I'm supporting what your recommendation is. And when we get to a motion, I'm happy to make a motion.
Thank you, Silene. I appreciate that. Nicole, I see your hand.
Good evening. My concern, I also agree with in supporting of the Firehouse. I think the more options we have for more people to participate, the better. And although I would prefer the 2 days, I also don't like the possibility of having 2 different places and different times. And if we couldn't get, especially in some of the smaller communities, if we couldn't have the same place and the same times, I think it would cause too much confusion, and trying to communicate that becomes a little more difficult depending on the locality. With that also in mind, 14 localities, and not all of them are cities. And having lived in a county for many, many years, I would like us to at least consider that if we're not going to have as many different, we're not going to have as many different places in a community, that we consider the fact that a lot of these communities are bedroom communities. That means they're leaving, they're gone all day long, and then they're coming back to their community. So maybe we look at extending those evening hours a little bit later. I know that might cause an issue when it comes to if we're going to do centralized telling. But to give them, I don't know if we really need to have all, I don't know if maybe some of the middle of the day you don't, I don't know how you want to do that, but just to make sure that those people, if it's going to take you more than 5-10 minutes to get to, polling location, because you work an hour away from home because you live in the middle of the country, then let's try and give them a little bit more time, maybe. If it's going to be a weekday.
Yeah.
Saturday is not a big deal, but if it's a weekday, then maybe we need to consider possibly giving a little bit more time in the evening or front end in the morning.
No, I appreciate that. And something that I will say is that I would be supportive of, and hope you all would listen to your feedback, regardless of where you live within the congressional district, you could vote at any of the voting locations that are open. So to address your concern, Nicole, if you're registered in Charles City County, but you work downtown and it's easier for you to vote in the city of Richmond, we'll be able to see that you're a registered voter in VA4 and check you in. So that could alleviate some of that concern about, like, you don't have to necessarily vote in your locality. So if you're you're busy leaving work and you can't, get there at home, then we would still have a way of, you would still have another option potentially somewhere closer to you. I know it's still, there will still be, regardless of how we land this, like people are going to have to drive further than they would on a normal government run Tuesday election. We kind of just got to be as much at peace with that as we can. But we can do as much as we can as well to make sure that within the circumstances that we have before us, we can make it as smooth a process as possible. And I hope that people would support that as well. Jeff, I see your hand.
Yeah, first, I apologize you can't see me, although most of you know me, so you're not missing much. I re-upped everything on my computer and now I can't seem to access my camera. But anyway, what you just said, Alexis, I think is really important. We've spent so much time the last couple of years fighting for additional time for everybody to vote and additional ways for everybody to vote and making sure that making it as convenient as possible. And I don't want to complicate this, but I really like what you just said about being able to vote, anywhere you can. Anywhere you can get to. I think that will help a whole lot. I worry a little bit about just the Tuesday. Even in my life, that's a regular kind of a work day. A Saturday or even a Sunday thrown in there would help. I know that complicates things. Is there, with all the smart people we have on the call, is there a way to do like a location somewhere that's like almost like an absentee or in-person voting kind of a thing, so that we can kind of go, after we announce this and roll it all out, I could go, just like I do on a normal process, I go to Richmond City Hall or I go out to Laburnum and I vote when it's convenient for me. I wonder if we could think about that for a second. And I'm happy to volunteer.
I know you will, Jeff. You've always been one of the first to raise your hand. I will speak to that briefly because I did talk to at least Sham and maybe a couple other people about this today, which is I, again, really wanted to find a way to do a weekend option and also said, okay, what if we just did one place on Saturday or one place on Sunday? Again, we have been the party that makes voting as easy as possible, and I want us to model what we talk about. I also worried about giving preference to one locality or one part of the district by saying this part of the district gets an extra day, even if we tried to make that part as accessible to other people as possible. I just don't want to give the appearance or inclination that any part of the district is getting any kind of additional opportunity to vote. I know that wouldn't be our intent, but we all know everything's not just about an intent, it's sometimes about optics and perception as well. But again, this decision lies with y'all, right? With all of us together, we have to make this decision. I just want to share some of the conversations that I've had with a few other members throughout the day. And I got a chat that Dominique was trying to raise her hand. Dominique, are you able to come off mute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay,
great. I agree with the Firehouse primary, and I understand that we are normally the party that supports voting as much as often, as many days, and as many locations as possible. I think that our constituents would understand the time constraint that the governor put us in and understand that it is not an issue of our cause, of our making. And while we're considering where we're going to be and how long we're going to be there, I would just ask that we also need to seek volunteers who speak Spanish to reach our Spanish community as well. So I'm volunteering to help with that because I feel in the election process, they get neglected. And whatever we decide to do, we just want to make sure that we're not the party that neglects them as well. That's all I had.
Absolutely. Señora, si habla español, vamos, okay? We're going to do it. I actually already have our draft call to caucus translated from the city attorney's election. And we will certainly have to update it, but I will be glad to work with both Spanish-speaking interpreters for the day of, as well as anybody who is willing to help edit the translations that will be needed for ballots, as well as communicating about how to file as a candidate, et cetera. Thank you so much, Dominique, for raising that concern. I'm gonna come to, well, I'm pausing just in case somebody else was trying to raise their hand but didn't have access to that. And then Silene also made mention of a motion, and we love to take action. So I will move to her if there's no other questions.
And then we can have discussion after that if need be, but I'll make a motion that we have a firehouse primary on Tuesday
Thank you, Ms. Silene. And
at
just,
multiple locations. I want to throw that in there.
okay, so Silene's motion is for us to hold a firehouse primary, and that would be Tuesday next week, not tomorrow, y'all, at multiple locations. We'll need to have obviously a few more details nailed down, but I want to get agreement on that so far. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, I hear a second from Don. Is there any further discussion? Okay. Hearing no further discussion, I will call for a vote. All those in favor of holding a firehouse primary on Tuesday, December 20th at multiple voting locations to be determined by the committee, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you all so much. I also want to recognize, I think it's Janetta, who, well, actually, let me pause here before we move forward and talk a bit about candidate filing, because I know that's of interest as well. So now that we have agreed to have a firehouse primary on Tuesday, December 20th, I want us to talk about how a candidate can participate in such a process. And I think it's very important for us that regardless of who the candidate is, that they put themselves forward and that they are treated fairly as a part of this process. Yesterday, I mentioned that it is often our preference to really model off of what people would usually have to do to file to become a Democratic nominee. We also have to understand that we're under a different timeline than we would be in a usual circumstance. So I want to name first what you would usually do if it were June, or I guess March in 2022, and you were filing to be a candidate for the June normal cycle process as far as the primary. You would file a filing fee in the amount of $3,480, which is 2% of the congressional salary. You would submit 500 signatures at least. Most candidates usually submit more to make sure that they hit that 500 signature threshold. You would have to submit a declaration of candidacy, and there are some other criteria that don't come to us as party officials, but go to the state or the federal government. I would recommend that we try to do some level of that as far as including still a filing fee, as well as including some level of petition signatures. We have a very short window of time. So I, as a candidate, former candidate myself, I understand the burden that collecting signatures creates on a campaign. Also, as a voter, I understand that folks who are able to reach out to their communities and constituencies and get grassroots support shows the strength of their organization and their campaign, not just someone that has a check and can give the Democratic Committee a check and be on the ballot the next day. So with that in mind, I would like for us to lower the number of petition signatures required, but still require, say, 125 signatures for candidates to submit during their filing, as well as still require the filing fee in the amount of $3,480 that would be refunded if only one candidate files and we don't need to run the process, but otherwise would be used to help us facilitate the process as far as helping to reserve venues, helping to print ballots, like administer the election itself. But I would also open it up for a discussion to see if anybody has input on that. Oh, wait, one more thing, timing. We would need to figure out the timing as well on this call. Again, if voting is going to open on Tuesday and we want candidates and voters, frankly, to know who's going to be running and who's a qualified candidate, the deadline is going to be pretty soon. We are going to need to start receiving those filings as soon as possible and have them have the deadline, Thursday or Friday of this week, so that we could then communicate, hey, to the news media, to our Democratic committees, these are the candidates that have filed. And committees can then, and candidates can take the weekend to say, on Tuesday we vote, here are the options. I want to give as much time for candidates to file as possible, while also being realistic that if we give them until Monday, no voter will even know who's eligible for the ballot the next day. So I'll pause there, and I see Cylene's hand. I will go to you.
Question. So is it conceivable for petitions to be signed electronically like we have done before? I'm curious about that.
So that's a great question. I think it would be, again, up to this committee to decide. Is my understanding, and Sham can maybe help refresh my memory, in 2020, at least, maybe also in 2021, we did get approval for basically electronic submission, but it was still the printed form. So previously you had to always like physically turn in your printed signature document, have it notarized, and then physically hand it in. I believe through court order, maybe a court case that Lee Carter and others filed, they got permission to email in those same documents. So that allowed for some level of electronic signature, but not to the extent of like a Google form where people would just sign, their name in like that kind of electronic format. But Sham or others with knowledge of it, if you want to speak to that. Ooh, or I might have lost Sham to his honeymoon. No, you're here.
And I wanted to say, Madam Chairwoman, the filing fee, you'll get to deal with all of that because the filing fee goes turned into the chair.
Yes, correct. So, and this came up yesterday as well, the filing fee would be made out to the Democratic Party of Virginia, as they have a federal committee and generally are going to be the ones fronting a lot of the costs to just make this process run really quickly. And, it would be my hope that we would just use the same notarized petition form that any candidate would usually use that's publicly available on state government websites. It's the same, I probably have Don McEachin somewhere in a box like right next to me that I took earlier this year. And it's a format that candidates and campaigns are already used to and probably already have potentially ready to go because they expect us to have this as an option, as opposed to creating a new process that, we'd have to introduce to candidates and campaigns in an hour's time. So Cylene, I hope that answers your question. And Murdy, I'll come to you, and then Nicole.
Thank you so much, Alexis. Murdy Khan from Chesterfield. So I do have a question on the petition signature process. So I've seen, and again, I know this is a completely different level, it's congressional, but I've seen local candidates take months to get 125 signatures. And while it's one thing if they know when the signatures are due months ahead of time, I do have concerns about requiring signatures when there's a few days left. And kind of my gut instinct when I think about this is, well, if someone's giving a $3,480 filing fee, I don't see why just a random candidate would just put in $3,480. And I'm just wondering, what do we lose if we require a filing fee? Why do we still need signatures on such short notice? Because again, we're requiring such a large filing fee, and most people who may want to be candidates potentially may not have the time to get their signatures together with 5 days notice. So I do have a significant concern about signatures specifically.
Absolutely. And again, my concern, and I'm gonna go to Nicole and then Pete, because I saw Nicole's hand first. My concern is just making sure that we're having a democratic process. I am not as committed to petition signatures as I have been on like previous decisions that we've made so far, as far as like voting locations and days. If this is not the will of the committee, I will, hear it just like any other discussion. But I will go to Nicole and then Pete.
My question was about the petition signatures as well, which, petition signatures the words give me hives, but are we looking at spreading them out, having them come, like, would someone be able to get all of their signatures from one locality, or would we be asking them to actually get something from all 14?
So I think
if we electronically, then okay, then you could possibly do that. But if you were asking someone to do that physically, then no, that's just not possible.
Yep. And so I think there isn't currently a requirement that, like, if this were a normal process, that you had a set amount per district. And I certainly wouldn't want to create a new standard for our party run process. So my inclination would be to have a number of petition signatures that could be collected from any part of the district. I know some of y'all candidates like to flex and might say, well, I had 1,000 from each locality and that's on you. I'm gonna look for 100 total because I don't have time. But that is also at the discretion of the committee. If today we decided no petition signatures, that is what it is. If today we decided 500 and you needed 50 from at least 5, like, we can make this complicated, or we can try to make it as sophisticated, I should say, maybe not complicated, as we choose to. So I appreciate, Nicole, the question. And I think George had a similar question that he put in the chat. So I hope that answers yours. And I'm gonna go to Mr. Washington.
Yeah, Pete Washington, Prince George County, first time out, so tolerate if you would. The $3,500, $3,480 filing fee, has there ever been any pushback as that dollar amount or that sort of thing?
So again, this is the filing fee that you would have to file if you were a normal candidate, not under the special circumstance. The last time that we had a special election in this area for congressional level, like, I couldn't tell you. It's been a long time for, like, Richmond area, like Bobby Scott represented us before, right? And then we had Congressman McEachin. So there hasn't been necessarily a similarly situated Richmond, Tri-Cities, like this area, I guess, congressional district special election. I will say that there have been lower level offices in recent years that have charged more money. And there have been local special election offices that have charged less. So I expect, and I hope that I don't sound like a broken record, but I expect that regardless of what we choose tonight, that there will be people that don't like it for one reason or another. And that the most important thing is that we feel like, as a body, as a team, that we came up with the best decision possible, and that we all are kind of supportive of each other's decision, and are on the same page, which is why I'm really proud of the unanimous vote a little bit ago. And I hope that we can continue to be kind of in a consensus regardless of what we choose.
I'm good. I'm just concerned.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate the concern, Mr. Washington. I see Mr. Alston. Are you coming off mute and then back to silent?
Yeah, I couldn't read. This is Al Olson in Southampton County, probably the smallest of the areas involved. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. Just to get this moving, I'd move that we have the normal filing fee, that it require 150 signatures, and that everyone must submit their full requirements by this Friday.
Thank you. That is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
So Mr. Alston moves, and Silene, I'm gonna.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
I'm putting my hand down.
Okay. Mr. Alston moves, and Delegate Aird seconds that we have the regular filing fee, and that it would be due to this committee by Friday. I would like to set noon as the deadline so that I have time to get it done before the end of the day. And then that the signature requirement be 150 signatures. Is there any discussion on that, further discussion?
Is it possible to get a roll call on this vote?
Sure, I can do that.
Discussion.
Before you, yeah, I was about to say, before you do the roll call, I had a question too.
Absolutely. Roland, and then I think Dominique.
I want to make an amendment to the motion. I'm trying to think how to put this, though, so that it states what we expect as far as where the signatures have to come from. we might want to have multiple jurisdictions, but not all 14, like 2 or 3 or 4. But I think the motion that we finalize needs to have a specific answer to that question.
Thank you, Roland. So if it's okay with you, what I'll suggest is that we have this motion and then we have another motion that you can offer related to any requirements to these, where these signatures come from. Since it sounds like you support this general concept of the deadline and time frame, I just don't want to complicate it with so much, if that's okay.
That's good.
Okay, thank you. And then Dominique.
Hey, Dominique, Chesterfield County. He kind of talked about my question, so I'll wait for that motion to pose my question to that. Over.
Okay, thank you, Dominique. Is there any further? Okay, Don. Oh, you're on mute. Yes.
I'm Don Glazer from Richmond City. I just have a question about that date on Friday. Was it Thursday at 12 or Friday at 12? I'm sorry. Friday. The deadline?
Friday at noon.
So people would not be able to campaign before then?
Oh, people can certainly campaign before, just like any other election. So often a candidate will start campaigning. Obviously, people have already started campaigning, but they just wouldn't be certified as an official qualified candidate until after that deadline. Unless, they file on Tuesday, I get all the paperwork, I can tell them, yes, they've done everything correctly, or Wednesday. People would have up until Friday at noon to get their paperwork in. Additionally, if somebody wanted to go ahead and give me their check tomorrow because they got their bank account ready while they still worked on signatures, they would have, the next Wednesday or Thursday to continue to submit their documents necessary. But people would certainly be able to campaign regardless.
So I was just concerned about our issue that happened in Richmond where a candidate filed and then there was a question mark about his filing and then he missed his deadline and couldn't run. So I was just wondering that if there is an issue with the filing at 12 o'clock, is there enough time for them to sort of cure or make whole and make correct anything that wasn't correct on their filing? Is there enough time to do that before the Tuesday?
Thank you for that question. And I know I think maybe Danny from College Dems brought this up briefly yesterday as well. Once we kind of get general consensus, we'll have to put out a full call to caucus that will have detailed rules and instructions for filing and participating in the caucus. What is the usual manner for both the state government as well as the state party is once we set a deadline, that is the final deadline, but you can file paperwork up until that deadline. So, and I will do my diligence and folks that are, supporting me as far as state party staff and et cetera. If we review your signatures on Wednesday and we see that you're 5 short, we're gonna call you and say, you're 5 short, come back before Friday at noon to give me your 5 more. Or, hey, you wrote the check to the wrong person. It's supposed to be Democratic Party of Virginia. And people would be able to make corrections up until that final deadline. But if it's 11:59, you've submitted it for the first time, and then at 12:01, as I start reviewing, I realize, hey, they missed this requirement or that requirement. At that point, it would be too late. So people would have the opportunity to make corrections so long as they are making those corrections before the final deadline, if that makes sense.
I just wanted clarification on what the process and what the sort of appeal process could possibly be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I know the motion right now is on Friday at noon. If that should fail because people would want it to be earlier so that the public, or for whatever reason, we could certainly have another motion. But just to be clear, yes, people could file, up until that deadline. Once the deadline hits, if they still needed to make a correction, it would be too late. They would not be qualified as a candidate.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Are there any other questions on that? I did just want to state again, I think the motion was for 150 signatures, the filing fee of $3,480. And there would, if Mr. Alston would consider this a friendly amendment, be just a declaration of candidacy form that just basically says, I'm a Democrat. This is my contact information, so I know where to call them. Thank you, Mr. Alston. And that was moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? If not, I will go ahead and call for the vote. All those.
I have one question.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry.
Dominique, please.
Sorry, Dominique Chisholm County again, related to the deadline. So if someone doesn't have all their stuff turned in, they turned in the check, not enough signatures, they get their check back at 12:01, or we don't cash it type thing. Is that what happens? If they fail to
Yes.
meet all the criteria to be a candidate?
Correct.
They
If you
would just
fail
get
to
everything
meet
back.
all the criteria to be a candidate, or if only one candidate were to qualify, then we would return that candidate's fee. And essentially, and cancel the caucus, right? They would just be our nominee. So say we only received a filing Friday at noon from one candidate, they filed correctly, they gave us everything, and they're the only one. Congrats. We don't have to run this on Tuesday, December 20th. They're our next person going to Congress and we move on. If we have multiple candidates that file, one of them does not file completely, but they did give us a check, they get their money back. Otherwise, if candidates file correctly, we cash their checks, we go run an awesome election.
And all that will be in the call, Alexis. I'm sorry, I couldn't raise my hand at the moment. So they'll know whatever decisions we make, it'll be included in the call.
Exactly. Okay, all those in favor of the motion to require a declaration of candidacy form, 150 petition signatures, and $3,480 filing fee, please say aye. By the deadline.
Aye.
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 Any?
Aye.
No.
No. May I comment? I have heartburn. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Washington, let me just finish calling this, please. And are there any abstentions? Okay.
Here. If
Mr.
that's the
Washington.
place. Okay. This is, again, my first time in this process. And I have, this is an eye-opener for me. This pay-to-play thing, I have heartburn with it. So just move on, it's fine. I just want to express my concern.
I appreciate that. The ayes did carry that vote, and Mr. Washington, I recognize your concern. I appreciate you for sharing that. So we have now, just to recap, because I know we're getting through a lot of stuff tonight, and it's 8, and Lord only knows how long your day has been. We have established that the primary will be December 20th, on Tuesday, next Tuesday. In order to become a candidate, you will need to file with the committee, with me, by this Friday at noon. And it will be required to submit a declaration of candidacy form, 150 signatures, and the filing fee made out to the Democratic Party of Virginia. As has been referenced a couple times tonight, we will have a detailed call to caucus that includes all of these rules and specifications that we've kind of broadly described tonight. And I will, I know we discussed before just needing to move really quickly in order to do that well, and make a lot of decisions on final venues and whatnot. And I appreciate everyone who has been helping out with that process so far. I wanted to recognize Ms. Danette. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back to Roland's motion. I'm so sorry before we keep going. Roland did have a motion related to, or an idea that he wanted to put into a motion related to specifying geographies from which the signatures had to come. Roland, do you want to speak to that?
I do not want to make the motion for that. I wanted to make sure that we include the answer to this question in the data. If Dominique has an idea on a specific number, then I will second her motion, whatever it is. I just think it should be in there.
Thanks for the alley-oop, Roland. I'm Dominique Chatters, Chesterfield County. So my only concern with that was, I like what we were trying to do with letting people vote wherever they're closest to. Is it possible that for signature wise, since we're gonna do the 150, that as long as they get signatures from people in the 4th CD, can we not put a number on it, if that makes sense, right? I don't want to say you need 25 from the this district, 25, can we just let them, because of the short suspense, and 150? I was hoping that would be something that the committee would agree to, that as long as they're in the fourth CD, then let them sign the petition. Over.
I'll second that motion if it's a motion, Dominic.
Well, let me phrase it that way, ma'am. Not a problem. I make a motion that the signatures can come from anywhere in the fourth, since we are requiring the 150 and the.
I'll second that.
Awesome.
I just seconded, honey. But you can, right.
Yeah. Murdy, you might have got beaten to the punch, but I'll make you an honorary second. So Dominique's motion is that any, again, registered voter in the Congressional District 4 would be able to sign this petition. Candidates wouldn't be required to have certain geography requirements and whatnot. So that is the normal, ordinary process, and we're just making it clear that that will be the process we follow as well. Is there any discussion? I see Jeff Painter's hand, so I'll go to you.
Maybe I missed this, Alexis. Did we decide that this was the truly old-fashioned way of paper and pen, or there was an electronic component as well?
Great question. We discussed it, but we did not make a decision. I think we could still come to that maybe after this motion. I do want to make sure we're really clear. So thank you for raising that, Jeff. Any other discussion on the motion, which is to allow the ordinary process, which is regardless of where you live in the fourth, candidates just need to get 150 signatures from registered voters. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
That was an aye, so not an opposition. Any opposed? No. Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Mr. Morrison, thank you so much.
Mhm.
The motion passes. As Jeff kind of revisited, we can come back to the conversation of electronic voting. I would really like for us to do this under the usual fashion, just again, to keep this as close as to what candidates and campaigns are already used to. We have signatures of qualified voters. I forget what the official form is. It's like already on the State Board of Elections website that people could print off today. That would be my recommendation as far as what we ask people to circulate in their community and get notarized, as opposed to standing up a new process. But that is up to the decision of this body. And I see Murdy's hand, so I'll come to you.
Yeah, I just want some clarity on the filing fee portion. So an issue that I've seen with caucuses in the past, or with when the party itself takes the filing fee, is sometimes people say that the filing fee, it has to be in the form of a certified check. Some people say it needs to be any check, but if it can be any check, well then is the filing fee then deposited immediately and verified that the funds were in the account it came from? I just want to make sure that this is as clear as possible, because I have seen in the past that there have been filing fee disagreements as how the filing fee needs to be, what form it needs to take, and then how it's verified. Like, let's say it doesn't have to come in the form of a certified check. Is it verified immediately when it's given, or how does that work?
Thank you, Murdy, who is treasurer for Chesterfield Dems. And how can you tell, right? Thank you for that question. Sham, y'all's bank account is receiving this money. So you tell me what you want, and we'll make that, I think, the preference of the body. Or Randy, maybe you're better since you actually.
Alexis, it might be me, Christy.
Yeah.
I actually cashed the check, so
there you go.
I don't care. To be perfectly clear, as long as you can confirm that it was received by the time that it was specified, I don't mind. Like, however they want to give it to us. Check, money order, please do not bring me cash.
The way I'm not running around with no $3,000 worth of cash, okay?
Other than that, I'm pretty open. If you are paying, like if someone wants to pay electronically and it's through ActBlue, they will need to be covering the ActBlue fee. That's the only request.
Thank you, Christy.
Is it verified at the time the check is given that the funds are in the account?
I will not be able to verify that. I'll be the one receiving it. But I will expeditiously.
For the record, I also can't verify that in a timely fashion. I think we're going to have to do honor system there.
I agree.
I see Tavares's hand.
Yes, my question was about, as I recall for the convention, or the last party reorg, participants were that had an option to pay online through ActBlue, an ActBlue link. Assuming they cover the fees, I would prefer that that option be available to candidates.
Yes,
In a
it sounds
similar
like
fashion.
Yeah, it sounds like Christy is open to helping us set that up.
Yes, and Alexis, what we can do is create a specific ActBlue for this, and we'll send it to you tonight.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So for those, maybe there's nobody here that's unfamiliar with ActBlue, but that would just be an electronic version instead of check that candidates could use. Randy.
And just to speak to that real quickly, Alexis, just for everyone's sake, that obviously does come through almost immediately with an email to us. So we would be able to provide it with a date and time to just for the authentication that it came in Friday before noon for that process.
Thank you, Randy. Mr. Alston, were you looking
Yeah,
to speak?
Alexis, I just had a question, for unsophisticated guys from the country like me. I noticed in the newspaper articles, it's indicated that 2 candidates had already filed with the Federal Election Committee, okay? Could you give a quick clarification on that? Is there a deadline for them to file for this particular election? And what's the difference between their filing there, and if they miss that deadline, are they excluded from our primary?
Great question. So in order to be a federal candidate and to receive federal PAC money, you have to file with the Federal Election Commission. I believe that's the right entity's name. And so that is why you start seeing candidates announce and file, because as you start publicly communicating about your congressional candidacy, you have to be also tracking your money and your spending and all of that. And so that is actually a totally separate process than our process. It is required for them to come into our process, but they don't necessarily have to do that before they can enter our process. So they have to be a federal candidate. And it can happen simultaneously, it can happen before, but they cannot just file with us and not talk to the FEC. That will get them in trouble, if that helps make it make sense for you. Yeah, of course. Okay. I think we were having a conversation about electronic signatures versus regular signatures. Do we need to have a vote on that, or are people just kind of under the understanding that we're going to do a normal? I can't remember if we actually had a motion, Secretary. Sorry if you can help me. We kind of got lost in the conversation.
Yeah, I don't think that we ended up with a formal motion on it because we were pivoting back to the question from Jeff, and then we kind of got off on the tangent. So I don't think there was a formal motion. I'd have to go review the footage.
There was not a motion. There wasn't a motion.
Yeah.
Motion signatures are the 150 signature requirement is a paper signature requirement.
Thank you. Roland moves that we use the normal qualified petition of voters form for this process. Is there a second?
Second.
Delegate Aird. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion will say aye.
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 And any opposed? Okay. Thank you all so much. I'm going to recognize Miss Janetta, who has another motion.
That one's going to get back in my fucking ring.
Yes, thank you.
So sorry, I think we had some background noise, but if we can unmute Miss Janetta.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I know that this process is going to move really quickly. And for that reason, I would motion that we approve a smaller subcommittee to work on finalizing all of the election details. with those persons being LaSharice, Celine, and yourself, Alexis, if you are willing.
Thank you, Mr. Netta. And you're breaking out a little bit, so I'm going to restate it, and then I'll also ask for a second.
Second.
Thank you. I'm just going to restate it just because I feel like there was a lot of background noise happening. So Ms. Janetta was recommending, if we can mute those who aren't speaking. Thank you. Ms. Janetta was recommending that we have a smaller working group, which we did briefly discuss yesterday, to continue to move this work forward as far as detailing the call to caucus and working closely with the Democratic Party staff to start reserving venues and getting this election stood up in a timely fashion. And she recommended the Disability Caucus Chair, Ms. Eileen Montgomery from Brunswick, former 4th CD Chair and former Delegate LaSharice Aird of Petersburg, as well as myself for that committee. I believe Eric seconded it. And so, Nicole, if you're speaking in discussion, I will go to you next.
I want to just say one thing. I'm a former 5th CD chair.
And also a former CD chair.
Yeah, I don't want to take that from LaSharice. Yeah.
Child, if I start going through all of y'all's titles, we'll be here until tomorrow when candidate filing opens. But please know that your service is recognized. I appreciate you.
No, you said 4th, and LaSharice was 4th, and I have been 5th. So that's what I was clarifying.
Absolutely. I appreciate you. I see Nicole's hand and Roland.
So this may or may not be for right now. If we're going to do this committee, would the decision on whether you're going to do this central tallying versus in the locations, would that be a decision that will be made now or with this subcommittee?
I think we can certainly get some consensus now. But as far as like exact time of ballots opening, location, all of that.
Correct. Right. Yeah. Yeah, my suggestion, my concern or suggestion would be that we make the decision of yes or no now, and then how it's done could be figured out by the committee.
Absolutely. Roland, I see your hand.
Do the folks nominated for the special committee prefer to make the decision about the number of voting locations, or that we discuss it some and get some consensus as whether it's 14 or more or less, or to get some general guidance? Do you prefer to do that after you have a special committee?
I would love to definitely get some direction. I think we will need some broad discussion to be able to, based on venue availability, make decisions that are generally in line with this committee's guidance. I would get hesitant about, getting a recommendation today that we must have this many in each location under these specific hours, just in case like we're able to do all of that, except for one locality can only do this, you know what I mean? Or if we generally have the guidance that whatever locations you open up, they all have the same hours. I'd love for us to have some guidance, but also broad discretion to be able to act in y'all's best interest, given the time that we have to do all of this in. Okay. Is there any further discussion on this motion?
If we're, oh, sorry, my bad, I didn't mean to interrupt. So if we're putting this in a subcommittee, how's membership of that subcommittee decided? Because like, so for example, if we're trying to figure out like how many voting locations stuff there'll be, it's important that it be, diverse from a variety of localities to see what resources different committees can pull through. How's that all decided?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, we're all going to be reaching out, as we have already been, to each locality chair and central committee membership for recommendations. We have heard back from several folks already as of last night and earlier today about different venues availability, their fees, their logistical requirements, and we will continue to need to do that. What we're really looking for is, permission, guidance, support from this body for a smaller group to be able to make basically executive decisions, as we're not going to be able to continue to include, the entire Central Committee membership in every single detail. Though we want, again, your general guidance and feedback on the direction through a substantive discussion that we're having tonight, if that makes sense. Thank you, Murdy. Any further discussion on this motion? Okay, hearing none, I will call for all those in favor to say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no. Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. That motion carries. I want to close us by 8:30. So I'm gonna say that first, and then I'm gonna move us to the next conversation, which is, I know it's also of interest to make sure that we are communicating as broadly as possible about the voting process. And so there are a lot of different ways that we can do that. It obviously starts with us. So we're obviously, the three of us and the full Central Committee membership are charged with helping to stand up this process. But we also all work very closely with our Democratic committees, other civic engagement groups, and just our neighbors and friends. And it will take literally all of us to make sure that people know the details of this election, have accurate information, that we're working with the news media to communicate with the details for how to participate. And I really am going to lean on each and every one of us to help communicate that information accurately. So as far as next steps, now that we have some broad strokes, but very important concrete information locked in as far as how to file to become a candidate and when the election will take place, it will be my responsibility, as well as with our Secretary, Isaac Sarver, to issue a call to caucus. And that will include all of the rules for filing, contact information for myself, and for candidates to know exactly the window and checklist to file, as well as for voters to know some of the details as far as what we discussed tonight, that you can vote at any location, that you need to bring your normal ID that you would bring to vote, all that good stuff, time, etc. But we'll need to communicate that more broadly than a call to caucus. Some of y'all have seen a call to caucus. It is lengthy, okay, and detailed. And even though it's going to be translated into Spanish, like, not everybody's going to read a 14-page document. We are going to need some social media graphics. We're going to need you to call your friends. I would love for us to do like a robocall to Democratic leaders in our district, right? Like, we do have a very quick turnaround, but I think there are a lot of creative tactics that we can use, especially as we work with our candidate campaigns and civic engagement groups and the news media to communicate our message. I would love to take just a couple minutes to see if there are any suggestions from this body about ways to communicate really quickly to a broad and diverse group of Democrats over the next couple days. And we'll take that guidance and pair it with the budget so that we can make it happen. But we'd love to open up for any ideas about communication and making sure this is a broadly accessible election under the circumstances we have.
We have a budget for text banking?
We will have a budget for whatever we decide to do. I will will it to happen. No, text banking is generally a very cost-efficient method. I will say it does require a little bit of logistical support to set up, and I would need to talk to party staff about what we already have available to us to be able to stand up quickly. So Nicole, if that's something that you're interested in, I can definitely work with. Who would it be, y'all? Randy.
Randy's running point from DPVA, so everything funnels through me right now.
And I withdraw my volunteer support. I will not work with Randy.
Old foes, I see.
Nicole, me too.
Messy.
Roland, I think your hand was still up from something before, so I'm going to put it down. But please, if there's anybody else that has ideas, Dominique, I see you raising your hand, and Murdy, I see you next.
Dominique Chatters, Jessamine County. So we need to get on social media. So is there a way we can do, I know TikTok is 3 minutes. You could probably do a 1 minute something on Instagram and then the same thing on Facebook, but we need to like do a, hey, the 4th CD needs you, hype kind of something to reach social media so that we can get the attention that it deserves from the people who are on those platforms, get them talking about it, because the younger voters are what's going to help drive this, in my opinion, because the rest of us who are a little bit older might just read the email. We might read that 14-page document, right? But for those of us who might not, the social media approach, I think.
I appreciate that, Dominique. And yes, the DPVA has already started working on a social media toolkit. I know that while the 4CD doesn't have our own like social media platforms, each of us do, many of us do, I shall say. A lot of Democratic committees do, and the DPVA will also be amplifying on their platforms. So as we finalize like exact voting locations and all of that, we'll make sure that we push out a full social media toolkit that people can use to put it on their own Democratic committees platforms or their personal platforms. And we'll definitely work with, again, news media to make sure that they're communicating it on their social media platforms as well. But I definitely agree. We want to reach people on digital platforms so that we communicate this information really quickly. Murdy, and then I'm gonna come to Ms. Antoine.
Thank you. My question is related to communication or maybe suggestion related to communication amongst the localities or the local committees involved in this process. So of course there are 14, I think about 14 localities in this that are going to be somehow involved in this race. And our local committee chairs especially are gems in potential resources for volunteers, in potential knowing, maybe where a good voting location may be. So I was wondering, is there a way, and I know everyone's doing so much and there is so much related to this, but is there a way to have some sort of chat specifically revolving around this, maybe with our local committee chairs, or just some way that the local committees feel involved? And then who knows, maybe long-term that can bring, more communication with our local committees together as well. I just want to make sure that all of these people who know their regions very well are involved in the process. And I just want some feeling that, okay, I know for sure that there is some communication that's going to happen this way to get input from all of these people who know their regions very well.
Great question, Murdy. Yeah, so far we've mostly used email to communicate to all of our committee chairs. Like that's our listserv that we use. If people are interested in another platform, I'm definitely open to that. But so far, as far as making sure that everyone has access to the same information, I know I have an email for everyone. And there are just some folks that don't necessarily use different apps or technologies. And I just want to make sure that whatever communication channel we go forward with, everyone's able to access it so that everyone's getting the same thing. But I'm open to that, Murdy, and thank you for the suggestion. Sandra, and then,
oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Miss Johnson.
I think Ms. Antoine.
Yes,
was
Ms.
going to speak.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. My concern would be, and after 4 decades of this, I would say I still focus on our most senior population of consistent voters, that we do want to make sure, however, we do get the word out, that we consider how do we reach them that may not be as computer savvy. And I do hope that we may consider maybe some advertisement radio. And there are stations and that many of them do frequently and listen to them on a daily basis. I just wanted to throw that out as far as reaching people in the manner in which we can and where they are.
Absolutely, Ms. Antoine. And I think we can definitely make sure that, again, once we have the voting locations nailed down and the times, et cetera, that we have flyers that can be printed and handed out either in community centers, senior homes, posted in post offices or libraries, et cetera, that are, I was about to say nonpartisan, but non-candidate driven. So, it's not necessarily just like candidate A's flyer, but it says like 4th Democratic Committee information, and this is how you vote. And if there are any other suggestions for ways that we reach the populations that you're in touch with, you know where to find me and feel free to suggest those ideas and we'll do our best to make it happen. I'm going to go to Dawn and then Willene.
I hope everyone can hear me. I had to switch to my iPad.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. I didn't know because I missed a lot of the discussion on the last part, but I didn't know if, but on this part, is it possible or you were set up for a press conference tomorrow with all the media, whether it be radio, TV? I guess DPVA could access their general media network. And I don't know who would be doing the press conference, whether you, Alexis, as chair, or whether it would be someone from DPVA to sort of let the radio, television, and Richmond Times-Dispatch know what decisions we've made. And that could also be disseminated out maybe at some other point and be sort of be free advertising.
Absolutely. And Dawn, I wish I could wait till tomorrow. The way CNN has been on my line all day, you know what I mean? Like,
okay.
As soon as we adjourn tonight, I will be working with the party to release the information that we have decided. And then we'll need to continue to release, additional details as we have voting locations get confirmed, as we have, the specific times and whatnot. But I don't know, unfortunately, that we're going to have even the luxury of pulling together a press conference just because of how quickly this information is going to need to move. I know for a fact that reporters are watching this discussion live right now. And so the good news is they want to carry the story with us. And maybe it won't take as much of a logistical effort for us to communicate to them because they're ready to take our press release, our statements, and kind of run with it pretty quickly. Miss Willene, I'll come to you.
Thanks, Alexis. This is Willene Johnson from Dinwiddie County. Alexis, since you have that ready list of the committee chairs, I would suggest that you send out whatever information you have now, including the dates, but also contact for volunteers. If you could send that out to them tonight, that would be terrific, because I think we need to get the word out as soon as possible. And we certainly wanted to collect volunteers. One thing that I wasn't clear about is voting places. I'm assuming that you mentioned paying for sites that some public buildings will also be available, although usually like our local community center or other places do have a small fee. Is there an obligation? It was called a firehouse, a firehouse primary for, I guess, for a good reason, that at one time these kinds of public buildings were used for the voting. Is that still the case? And what types of venues should we be looking for?
Thank you so much for that question. First, yes, we need volunteers, and I have a sign-up form that I will drop shortly, actually that Randy helped us put together from the party, that I will put in the chat shortly, that I will also send out to committee leadership. It is pretty high level right now as we don't have specific locations locked in, but we will want people to go ahead and start recruiting their sorority networks, their civic engagement friends, neighbors, community members, Democratic Party activists, who can be available to help us facilitate this process next Tuesday. There will be training for all volunteers that participate ahead of time, so you do not need to be an election expert. And depending on the role that you are assigned to, there will be certain requirements. For example, if you are responsible for overseeing the ballot box or counting votes, we would ask that you are not publicly endorsing a candidate. But if you have endorsed a candidate, that doesn't mean that you can't have any way to support the election. We just need to make sure that there is certain integrity related to the folks who are counting votes and that kind of thing. Of course, candidate campaigns will also have the ability to oversee the entire process of the election. That'll be spelled out in the call to caucus as well. Ms. Johnson, to your second point about locations, our preference for voting locations, generally a good place to start is if you already have it as a voting location in your locality, let's start there. So if a library is already usually used on election day, let's check in with that place, or a church, recreation center. Those are generally already set up as far as ADA concerns are required, parking accessibility, that kind of thing. If you exhaust that list and you haven't found anything in your area, that's when we'll look at other places. We'd certainly welcome your help in researching places in Dinwiddie. But I will commit to you that the task force that you all supported earlier today will be looking at trying to make sure that we have a good range of locations throughout the district that will be available for a broad range of hours on December 20th, next Tuesday. Tavares, I see your hand, and I'm gonna hope that this might be the last hand that I recognize so that we can start wrapping up and I can start working with our fellow subcommittee chairs to do this thing. Tavares. Sir, you're on mute. Still can't hear you.
Sorry, I got all these, too much tech. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes,
You answered my volunteer form question already. Thank you. The last question, well, comment, I guess, is like as much as possible whenever like filing fees mentioned or the shortness of time. I know you know this, but like I'm just saying that folks in the general population don't often understand how these rules sort of create this urgency, even though the election itself is several months away, or a few months away rather. So just whenever we talk about the filing fee, make sure to, if we can just make sure that it's like the standard fee if you were running for House in general. And then like the timing is because of what the governor's given us. So that's all I wanted to say.
absolutely. And again, y'all, I know over the last hour and a half, we've had a lot of conversations and we've had a lot of different opinions discussed and ideas. And I hope that you feel that all of them were heard, even if your perspective wasn't ultimately agreed upon. Because to your point, Tavares, it really is going to take all of us, I think, communicating the same message and being on the same page and trying to advocate for a good process to make sure that, despite any critiques on the process, that we are at least united in our agreement that we're going to do the best we can as Democratic activists and party leaders. And that we're going to be as clear as possible with the public about how they can participate, and candidates as well, how they can participate. Though we covered a lot in an hour and a half, y'all, and a lot of that is because a lot of y'all have been working all day on this. And so I really want to thank you for that. I would like for us to start wrapping up. If there's nobody else that has an urgent desire to speak to something tonight, with a lot of gratitude, I thank you for the honor to chair this committee, and looking forward to a really robust process. Me and our fellow committee chairs, as well as the Democratic Party of Virginia staff, will be working very urgently tonight and early into the morning to get all of this information communicated out accurately and clearly to the general public, our candidates, and our Democratic Party leaders. With that, I bid you goodwill. Thank you. Good night.
Alexis, I just want to say, I want to commend you, having been there, on the job that you're doing right now. I know it's a lot real quick.
Education.
So I want to say you're doing a good job.
I heard,
second that.
Thank you.
thank you. And I heard Alexa chime in, so I'm sure she feels congratulated as well. Delia Aird and Silene, if you can hang back with the party staff so we can just